Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this week's weekly wisdom webinar. Thank you so much for joining. Very grateful to have you here. This week's topic sees us looking at the second tenet of the authentic self model. And we're looking at fear, failure, feedback. Now, the title or the tenet itself reveals a great deal about the tenet. It reveals a great deal about what fear and failure actually is and the value of fear and failure. So what we're really looking at today is examining how fear and failure is of value to our lives, and of course how fear and failure really lends itself to living an authentic posture. So let's recap. Actually, before we get into it, please let me acknowledge, of course, the traditional landowners of this land, and of course the traditional landowners of all lands across the entire earth, across all lands, and their innate wisdom and contribution to society currently, and the hardship that many of our traditional landowners have experienced and that have suffered, and that we wouldn't be here today if not standing on the shoulders of giants. And the traditional landowners of this land, of course, and all lands are definitely a powerful, strong contributor to that. So thank you. So let's recap on what it means to be authentic and why have an authentic self-model. And I think what I actually may do is quite regularly look at, in fact, probably every webinar series in relation to the authentic self-model is recapping on the power of living an authentic life and living in a posture of authenticity and what that actually means. So first of all, we're talking about the word or the term authenticity is synonymous with the term truth, with the term integrity. And from this place, we are really referring to, quite simply, our internal self, our internal dialogue, our internal emotionality, our internal function, our internal thought patterning, behaviours, belief systems, etc., accurately being reflected by our external behaviours and our external actions out in the world. And when there's a mirroring effect there and a symbiosis of internal and external, internal being our inner world, external being our actions, our behaviours, our outward gestures, our relationships, interrelationships, not intra-relationships, when there's a match there, that's living in integrity, that's living in authenticity. That space right there, that gap where we're able to merge the internal and the external, that space where we create that, my friends, is a well-desired state or well-desired posture to maintaining life, just as is happiness, for example. A desirable posture will always be a positive emotion, for example, as opposed to a negative emotion. Now, there's nothing wrong with experiencing negative emotions, in fact, such as anger, sadness, jealousy, frustration, anxiety. Experiencing these provides us with insight into self, provides us with deep insight into who we are. But are they desired states? In other words, would we like to be experiencing these in some form of permanent or semi-permanent manner? The answer is effectively no, we wouldn't be. And it's not something of value to us. It's not something that brings us joy or allows us to really move deep or deeper into the fullness of our being. Well, no, I shouldn't say that it does. But if we remain in those states permanently or semi-permanently, what tends to happen is that we become paralysed by those states. And openness can't occur. It's not a posture that leads to an open state, such as happiness, joy, elation, bliss, the feeling of connection, being of service, giving, etc. Yeah. So we're really looking at today the value of how fear and failure really lend themselves to the authentic self-model. So how embracing the notion of fear, how embracing the posture of fear how embracing the value and the benefits of fear and failure within our socio-cultural paradigm can actually add tremendous value to our lives, can actually add tremendous value to who we are and how we function and move through the world. That, my friends, is super, super important. So let's begin with, I have a quote here and I want to read this quote to you. Let's begin with the early stages of understanding fear, of connecting our lives to the role of fear. So today's webinar is going to be largely about fear, but we're definitely going to speak to failure as well. We're going to speak to what the benefits of failure are towards the end of this webinar. We're going to speak towards what the benefits of experiencing fear are as well. But we're also going to understand fear-failure feedback. So fear and failure as a positive reinforcing feedback loop when we're able to pay very close attention and when we're able to move with deliberate intention in our lives. And when we combine that intention and attention to self, when we experience the fear, when we experience the failure, we have a tremendous capacity to learn and grow from those experiences as opposed to dwelling on them, as opposed to being stuck or paralyzed in the pain of that fear or failure, of the sorrow of feeling sorry for ourselves or not being able to budge from that negative state. Yeah. So let me read this quote by Frank Herbert. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. Through me here is the key word, yeah? Key term, we'll speak to that. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Now, for me, this is a beautiful, beautiful quote. And for me, I look at this and I think about the power that this quote maintains and the power that this quote holds over who we are as human beings and the potential that we have, that we are able to move into and through by allowing fear to be, when we experience fear and failure alike, we allow it. We allow these experiences to be something of great value, of tremendous value and growth for us. In fact, fear and failure can be some of our greatest teachers. So from this perspective, we can learn so much from experiencing or allowing ourselves to experience the fullness of what's scaring us, because or what we perceive as failure. Understanding, why do we perceive this as failure? Why do we perceive a particular experience as failure? Why is it triggering us? What is it prompting within me? What is it doing for me or not doing for me? Why am I so emotional or deeply hurt by experiencing this perceived failure? And where is it coming from? So asking these quality questions, accompanying our experiences with quality questions grants us deeper insight into self and into our circumstance, where we can then grow and evolve from those circumstances so that we don't continue to repeat the same circumstances over and over again and be stuck in this space. Yeah. So that's really the most important aspect of understanding fear. So when we begin to understand the role of fear from a very foundational perspective, we begin to grasp the full importance of moving with fear in a very, very specific manner in life or through life. At any given opportunity, we have the ability to allow fear to be our ally. We can learn deeply from fear, to work with fear so that it may provide us with detailed feedback into observing our models of reality, our belief systems, and whether or not they are in alignment with our highest purpose and our truest path, whether or not they serve us or not. So by default, when we observe closely the role of fear, we're also understanding the intricate action that's required to step into and take courageous action in our lives. In other words, to make transformation, to make changes. But what does taking action actually mean for us existentially, and how can acting courageously actually change our lives and our course of direction. So we must embrace fear to actually then be able to step into a posture of courage. Now, a posture of courage effectively allows us to be and remain in open states of being. And open states of being are desirable states of being, because when we're in an open state, we're open to the information that life can bring us. We're open to learning and growing and fundamentally becoming the most elite version of self. And that's a wonderful, empowering place to step into and to be. Now, fear actually plays, and look, fear and failure as well alike play a pertinent role in our lives. Firstly, when we're looking at fear, it keeps us very safe from physical harm. And it's intrinsically and deeply connected to postures of self-preservation. So we have to respect fear. We have to respect the mechanism of fear. But we need to understand fear in a cultural context as well. And that's very different. That's what we're going to open up to today and speak to a lot more. Because without feeling fear, we would not recognize danger, nor would we act on removing ourselves from dangerous and precarious circumstances that would normally harm us or hurt us. And let us think of this as well in physiological terms. Let's expand our mind here a little bit on the role of fear. So we have approximately 100 billion neurons in our brains, with approximately 100 million billion electrical connections between those neurons that exist in our brains. It's phenomenal numbers. Like it's ridiculous to even begin to contemplate. And let us just be conservative for a moment and estimate that, say, each thought requires 1,000 neurons. And evidence suggests that it may be as few as one. But however, we take each memory and we place it in an imaginary, just imagine we take each memory and we place it in an imaginary manila folder. So we'll use this example of a filing system, so to speak. Now presume we place 25 of those folders in a file drawer. And then if we took all of those thoughts that we have during the day, which is approximately anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 thoughts per day, let's just say. It's around that space depending on who you are, of course. And if we took all of those thoughts in our brains and placed them in a 4-drawer filing cabinet system in this fashion, so think in physical terms now, the file cabinets would occupy a 100,000 square metre warehouse. 100,000 square metre warehouse. It's almost unconscionable to even think of that. It's an incredible amount of information to sift through, to process, to understand when making any type of decision in life. So we can then understand that feelings such as fear, for example, allow us to categorize this information and make sense of it in an accessible and speedy fashion, especially when it comes to the point of self-preservation. Consider feelings similar to someone standing in that warehouse directing us to that information, most pertinent and valuable and relevant to our situation in that space and time. And it's very, very important to understand that fear advises us if it is suitable and safe to proceed with caution, caution in life, but it also alerts us that there may be tremendous gain if we also proceed. Here's the interesting part. This is where the immense value of fear comes in. And from this vantage point, we can begin to view fear as an emotion or a state that can guide us to our very own personal glory. Rather than avoiding fear and very rarely acquainting ourselves with the power of fear, we can revere fear and embrace its power. And that is what I really want to speak to a great deal to when we're speaking to the immense value of fear and how it can contribute to our authentic self. Because to be authentic, to experience authenticity, true, real authenticity, we must know the fullness and wholeness of who we are. And if we don't know what scares us, if we're constantly avoiding fear, so if we get an uncomfortable feeling, for example, and we shut it off and we avoid it, we cut that away, we don't allow ourselves to experience the fullness of life. We don't allow ourselves to experience what it means to be whole. Because fear, experiencing fear as one emotion, as one experiential posture, to name one. And even failure as well, to experience what failure means, then to dissect it and break it down and understand it. If we don't do that, go through that process, we become fragmented, or we remain fragmented. We don't become whole because we're avoiding these undesirable states. But we simply need to step into them for enough time to understand them, and then move and flux in and out of them, and know that they're a natural part of life. I'm not saying go place yourself in, well, I sort of am actually, and I will later on, but I'm not saying constantly place yourself in dangerous situations. In fact, I'll never say place yourself in a dangerous situation. That's not healthy, and if you're constantly doing that, it's somewhat pathological, and there's an imbalance somewhere there. But we must understand, and I mean that in the kindest way possible as well, we must understand that there is a very pertinent role that fear and failure play in our lives. And understanding this will assist us in being more whole versions of self. See, fear also directs our lives. And in this day and age, in our socio-cultural context, it's so much more than just physiology and biology. Fear contributes to the deep and profound understanding of self. When we encounter fear, we have choices. We have an ability to choose. We can either sink with that heaviness, or we can choose to float and soar and take an action that aligns with our authentic truth, that aligns with our purpose, our groundless vision for self, our dreams, our truth. That's important. This posture requires courage. We then have an opportunity to work the muscle of courage. And when we expose ourselves to something, when we expose ourselves to a particular posture, we become naturally more proficient at it. Now, the more proficient you become at expressing courage and acting in courage, the more likely you are to step into that role when confronted with challenge, difficulty, arduous times, fear, or being on the verge of failure. See, it requires courage because we're on the experiential verge of being different and choosing a path that is foreign, as the courageous path often is, because stepping into courage isn't easy. It's not easy for many of us at all. So our lives must have clarity, direction, and purpose for us to experience a life of meaning and fulfillment. And meaning and fulfillment are ultimately what underpin our ability to experience happiness and integral truth in life. So when we're looking at fear being a direct supporter of meaning and fulfillment in life, because it gives us a whole understanding and perspective of self. And in addition to that understanding of self, we're able, so I'm just making an adjustment to the screen, we're able to experience more of life. See, the source of our vision comes from deep within us and is driven by our ability to step into our courage, and to recognize our courage, we must experience fearful states of being. We can't be courageous without experiencing apprehension or tension around a certain circumstance. So this is the polarity of reality and of our duality. And fear contributes to crystallizing our vision for self and allows us to know clearly what experiences we do not want to draw into our lives. If we wish to actualize the archetypal hero, so actualizing the archetypal hero, okay, that lies within all of us. Actualizing means to physically express here. That's what I'm referring to, that extension of our inner reality, okay? We must welcome fear as that fire that will light the flame to our desire to take action. We must welcome fear like a trusted friend, and it is a trusted friend. We simply need to embrace it. We embrace the power of fear and are open to all of its pertinent and empowering teachings. And when we do this, we enlighten our path with greater wisdom and knowledge for self and for our models of reality. And it's only when we regularly, consistently, and sincerely choose to summon the courage to conquer, understand, and move through our fears that we authentically become the highest and truest and best version of self. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, what we fear of most is usually what we need, or what we most need to do. And I would like to add to that is what we most need to be. Think about that. Feel into that. If we have a constant fear about an aspect of life, about an aspect of taking action around something that we know will intrinsically benefit us, but we're fearful of change, or we're fearful of being ridiculed, or we're fearful of failure, we simply repeat the same choices over and over again, and we get the same results. We experience the same outcomes and the same discontent with those outcomes because we're not challenging ourselves. You see, when we're talking about fear and success, now let me define success. Let me define the primary version of what success is. And success effectively and essentially is as follows. It is our ability to engage in a process of being fully, openly, and authentically. And when we do this, when we simply just engage without being attached to an outcome or an end state, but rather we realize that our end state is evolving and can always transform and change. And we really value the experience of the process, and we take courageous action on moving beyond our fear. That's success. And there's no failure associated with that at all. Failure is a perception, failure is a perspective, failure is a vantage point. And we can switch our vantage points very, very easily. So all experiential growth that we move through occurs outside of our perceived comfort zones. It is also important to understand that when we step outside of our comfort zones, we will experience apprehension, tension, doubt, and of course fear. But this is very normal as well. This is also where the magic occurs. Remember, fear is an immaterial muscle that requires active use if it is to be strengthened and utilized to its peak potentiality. Think about that. We can leverage fear as a great source of power to drive forward in life. See, fear in its most simplest form is an insufficient reason not to take action and not align ourselves with what we resonate with deeply. In fact, fear is all the more reason to step into our power. Because fear can be present in our lives because it is indicating to us that those feelings we are feeling mean we lack mastery over that particular area of life. It is because we have doubt around that area. We have doubt around execution. We don't have confidence. So let's use that fear as an opportunity to build competency and confidence in that area of life. How empowering is that? See, it is here that growth and expansion, in that space, that growth and expansion awaits us. It can take place in that state. Initially, yes, these experiential states will be disharmonizing. We will feel disconnected. We will feel quite in pain, uncomfortable, inhospitable, maybe even unbearable. But I promise you that if you resonate with this path but are being held back, like resonate with this path meaning that you feel there is great truth in this path, that you feel there is great wonder to be learned and taken from this path, but you're being held back because you're feeling angst, because it is simply unfamiliar, bear with this initial pain, because there is some lesson, new skill, or worthwhile benefit that awaits you on the other side of stepping into your courage and moving through fear. Not around it, through fear. That becomes powerful. Now, something of note is to understand the manner in which we process and become comfortable with particular life experiences. This is really, really important. So we expose ourselves, our senses, our minds, our hearts to a new experience. We then begin to become familiar with these new circumstances through continued exposure. This familiarity then breeds a comfort and deepen understanding, and it is then through this understanding that we benefit tremendously through insight into ourselves and into our environment and into our circumstances, of course. And the more we expose ourselves to fear, the less of a directive stronghold it has on our lives. More importantly, fear symbolizes synergy and mirroring of what we're internally experiencing and our externalized actions and behaviors. So with all that in mind, where can fear take us? Well, people, it takes us to the promised land. That is for sure. That's a given. So within this context, and I don't mean physiologically and biologically, fear can play a very similar role to the ego and is intrinsically connected to the ego in the sense that fear arises because we begin to move away from familiar circumstances, which by default means we begin to become uncomfortable. That's all that's happening. I'm not talking to a biological survival response here. I'm talking to a cultural response. I'm talking to a spiritual response. It is this discomfort that fear repels against, and hence arises warning to us that we are about to engage in something new that is unknown and therefore may hinder our strengths. This is where knowing self fully and deeply assists us in recognizing which path to tread in life, and actually then utilizing fear as a tool for growth as opposed, to a state that stunts our growth. Fear has our best interests in mind, just like our ego does. or just like our self-critic does. Fear wishes to manage our expectations, to reduce our disappointments and future projected pains, whilst also attempting to limit our perceived recklessness. When we know ourselves broadly and deeply, we are not shunned by fear, but rather we embrace it. So when I speak to knowing self, understanding self, connecting to self, it effectively means know what your pain points are. Know what you want from life. Know where you want to go. Have clarity in your direction. Have clarity in your belief systems. Have clarity in your models of reality. Have clarity in the type of life you want to live. Because when you do, the choices you make will align with that clarity. So when you experience fear, you know that fear is there as even perhaps a test. It's different for everybody. Perhaps it's there as a tester. Perhaps it's there as an indicator that you have to do something a little bit differently, but you can use fear as a marker. You can use fear as a landmark on your map, telling you where I need to go. Maybe don't go here, but go there. Fear is nothing to be feared. Fear is a sign. So success, when we're speaking of fear and success therefore in this context can be understood as our ability to accurately bypass our biological impulses to avoid new and growth-promoting experiences and carefully evaluate each fearful event as independent and worthy of careful evaluation or pursuit. And what we mean by bypassing our physiological or biological impulses, it means that we recognize it's not a matter of self-preservation physically. It could be a matter of egoic self-preservation. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with shedding a new immaterial skin, shedding a new personality, removing a layer of our cultural selves and embracing a new one. That's powerful, people. That's empowering. And we look at failure and we look at fear and we look at both of these postures, these modalities being a healing, having a healing, or embracing, encompassing a healing potential. How powerful is that? To be able to embrace a healing potential. It's like, wow, that's phenomenal to even think that fear can heal us, failure can heal us. Let's move into this space. Let's understand it. When fears we experience fully in our external world, reality are actually providing us insights into our internal world. They're projections into our internal world / reality. They're projections of what we are experiencing in here. And if we carefully observe, rather than shunning these away, if we carefully observe inwardly the messages that fear carries, we can begin to view what appears to be a negative into a positive experience by recognizing the why behind those feelings of fear. Fear, as every experiential state and emotion, has a purpose. We simply need to understand it. Its purpose and meaning varies from situation to situation, of course, and from individual to individual. But fear will always have something meaningful to teach us. And we need to embrace that. We need to come from that place, from that model of reality. If we repeatedly experience a very specific fear, it is telling us something about who we are and how we are choosing to live and move through the world. Fear has a tremendous capacity to heal us and heal our past pains. We simply must acknowledge that fear profoundly and honestly. And when we acknowledge that fear profoundly and honestly, we're being true with ourselves and we're allowing that fear to expose itself in fullness, not just at a superficial level that literally just scares the shit out of us, but deeper. What's deeper? What's happening deeper? Feelings of fear generally arise to the surface of our consciousness in order to bring our attention to places inside of us that require healing, equilibrating and movement, shifting. They're stuck. They're paralyzed. That paralysis doesn't allow us to move forward through life, to move fully through life. We become stuck in our choices, stuck in our behaviors, stuck in our relationships, stuck in life. We're of no value to ourselves or to others, or very little value, right? I shouldn't say no value, very little value. Fear grants us an opportunity to shift our shit, shift our stuff. I like that. I like that fear can do that for us. And we also look at the creative powers of fear. We also look at, fear is a tremendous creative outlet. We've been bestowed the gift of free will to assist us in creating multiple realities that resonate with our highest purpose and sense of being. most of the time, we are co-creating our realities without even realizing that we're doing so. And we do it through feelings of fear that we naturally revert to as a habitual behavioral response to aspects of life that challenge us. So we're allowing fear to shape and mold our direction because we're choosing not to evaluate what that fear can do for us. Fear of not having something will create its absence, while fear of having something will create its presence. So many of us live in fear of both. One or the other, we fluctuate between. From a cultural perspective and from a perspective of consciousness and personal inner growth, we could draw in situations and circumstances that sincerely scare us. Because it is in this space that we can turn fear into a powerful creative force that is the foundation of thinking laterally and creatively, and for observing life from a vantage point of openness and possibility as opposed to restriction, constriction, and rigidity. See, fear grants us opportunity in this present moment, in this context of creativity. But fear also the comforting disguise of fear, because we can get drawn into the habitual pattern of this. So fear can actually be quite comforting to many of us. So when one has felt very specific fear for lengthened periods of time, their attachment to it becomes very natural and normalized. It becomes habitual. This familiar energy then feels good. Here, fear can act as an escape and as a coping mechanism, a hiding place, a retreat from the unknown and from the difficulties and challenges of life. So we rely on fear not to be deeply challenged because that's even more fearful. So that initial bout of fear is like, whoa, stay back, don't proceed. Let's just stay here. Let's just keep doing what we've always done. We know what it's about. And it can distort our perception of what is actually safe and what is not. Beyond this, remaining in fear acts as a comforting ailment to the challenges and often painful experiences that accompany growth. We then avoid growth. The reality is perpetual and non-grounded fear limits our potential for freedom and authentic growth in self and for others as well, because the others aren't getting the best version of who we are. Retreating into fear becomes a plausible and comforting familiar option as opposed to stepping boldly into the unknown. And we lose the interestingness of life, the variability of life. We lose that. And that's sad. No one wants to lose that. Why do we want to be away from that spontaneity that life can give us, stepping into the unknown? No emotion, be it positive or negative, is ever wasted, ever. Eventually, it's never wasted. It is the perspective of value that, when taken, grants power and meaning to the entire emotional spectrum. And it is this part of our journey that's so important that we can take to disseminate the information presented to us in life and understand each and every purpose of every experience that we have in life. So next time you experience fear, like truly, deeply, sincerely feel into it. Ask yourself, what role is that fear meant to play in my life at this very specific moment in time, right here, right now? And you may just discover instrumental information, wisdom, and guidance about yourself that you never ever knew existed. And that's important. And look, we can also speak to failure. We can speak to setting an objective for self, setting an outcome, or being attached emotionally to an outcome where we feel ill and we feel negative feelings if we don't reach that outcome in a particular space and time. But we can speak to failure as a feedback mechanism as well, as a feedback loop. That failure is learning, failure is growth, failure is feedback. It's feedback into what can we do differently, what have we learned, how can we grow, how can we be of greater value to others, how can we be of greater value to the evolution of our own soul through processes of understanding the value of failure. Failure is never lost if we learn from it. Failure is a failure when we choose not to learn from failure. That becomes, sorry, my screen just paused, that becomes a problem. And it becomes a problem because we lose touch of what could be. And that what could be is tremendously beneficial to self and tremendously beneficial to the entirety of our lives, our experience, reality as a whole. So when we're setting goals for ourselves, when we're setting objectives that we wish to achieve, that even postures or states that we wish to assume and people that we wish to be, type of people that we wish to be, it's okay not to be that person or achieve that thing or live that experience, because through not doing so, if we ask quality questions of self, we allow ourselves and grant ourselves an opportunity to be the best version of ourselves. And in that space, we have the potential to become the best version of ourselves. And that becomes a very, very empowering place to step into. So let's look for a moment at the deep benefits of fear and failure. And let's observe very clearly that we have an opportunity at any moment to understand that there are direct benefits that are associated with fear, and there are direct benefits that are associated with experiencing failure as well. And fear of life, of life's circumstances, ultimately telling us we may be fearful of change. We may be fearful of experiencing something different. It is this change that we must pay careful attention to. Or is this yearning for change, or this fear of change? When the fear of change outweighs the possible wonder of engaging in that experience, we lose our power to take meaningful action and potentially experience the fullness of stepping into an aligned, fully expressive and redefined version of self. With this in mind, below our ability, not looking at our ability to then actually expand our opportunities for self, we're losing in life. So I want to list now a number of benefits associated with experiencing fear that can be realized when stepping into our courage, out of fear, and experience true transformation from the core. And the benefits that I'm about to mention, that we're about to go through, are designed to inspire and guide us towards greatness of self. That greatness is effectively the experiential, spiritual, and existential expression of the groundless version of who you are and who you have the capacity to be. Now remember, if we do not create change, change forced upon us will create and shape us. And with this stated, let us explore the marvel and the magnificence of what our lives may be like if we allowed fear to not control our lives, behaviors, thoughts, interactions, and actions, but rather stepped into the power of continuous growth and transformation. So let's begin with fear. Let's begin with the benefits of fear. Firstly, we have a capacity to experience personal growth when we allow ourselves to step into fear. Every time we experience change and transformation, we move from one posture to another. Our belief systems evolve, expand, move into a deeper understanding of reality and self. Our models of reality begin to flourish in ways we could never imagine. And when we break through that fear barrier, we are able to observe life more openly. Changes trigger process. We must remember that. Things move forward and develop because of those triggers, those changes, that progress that's allowed to take place. Another benefit is adaptability, flexibility, and robustness in posture. Frequently experienced changes make us more effortlessly adept and to life, and our ability to adapt to new and challenging situations, new environments, and new relationships increases dramatically. Our ability to do that effectively and with great efficacy. So that's very, very important as well. Fear assists us in connecting to our values. Breaking through fear points in life allow us to reevaluate our life circumstances and what is actually important to us. And from this perspective, we can obtain a more aligned understanding of our authenticity, our core, our center, and effectively our true self. We expand and we improve our behaviors, actions, and direction based on a more cohesive and integral knowing of self. It is the breaking through of fear, moving through fear directly, not around it, not ignoring it, not putting it to the side, but breaking through and moving through fear as a means to allow transformation to take place that allows us to experience this deeply, this cohesive, integral knowing of self with great depth. Fear develops an ability for us to persist, and it's known as the power of persist. Learning to persist through difficult times, arduous experience and adversity via repeated action aligned with moving through fear and aligned with a persistent attitude allows us to build and strengthen this proverbial muscle within in such a way that it becomes the new norm for us. So rather than avoiding life circumstances that are challenging us, if we continue to persist, the norm is to not so much put ourselves through pain, but to persist when we experience challenges and ask ourselves, what can I learn from this persistence? Now, the more you know yourself, the more you connect to yourself, the more you know yourself deeply and broadly, as we discussed earlier, the more you know, the greater the opportunity arises to say to yourself, the inner dialogue that takes place is, I know myself, I know where I'm going with this. If I remain in this space, this is what's going to happen. If I don't remain in this space, this is what's going to happen. But you know whether to move forward or not. And it's a legitimate knowing. It's a legitimate understanding of self. See, a posture, what we want to do is we no longer move through life with a rigid mindset, but rather with a growth mindset. And that's what the power of persist allows us to do. A posture, almost a posture of stoicism, which we've spoken about before in the Resilient Warrior, which is a tenet of the sovereign leadership model. The Resilient Warrior assumes a posture of stoicism where there's immense deep value in everything that we experience, where challenge is valued, accepted, and recognized as deep growth. It's embraced. It's actually sought after. And we arrive at this through persisting through difficulty and challenges, yeah? Moving through fear and allowing fear to enter our lives allows us to experience and be able to play out postures of strength and resilience. When we move through fear, we become that little bit more wiser, a little bit more aware, that a bit more conscious and resilient to the pains of life. This becomes quite insightful in the sense that we learn more about our capacity to live fully, and over time this attitude will be a deep blessing as it will allow us to realize our self-worth, our value and contribution to the evolution of self and others. Fear actually allows us to experience variety and spontaneity in life because we move out of that I am scared of change, I will stay in the space that I'm in. I will remain in this known space and I won't move through change. See, without breaking through the fear of routine and safety and moving towards inner and existential transformation, our lives will be incredibly boring, repetitive, and mundane. They remain the same. And that's where we experience internal friction points. We don't know where they're coming from, but they're actually coming from remaining in fear and remaining in habitual patterning, which allows us, or forces us rather, to remain in that habitual state of being. There's no change, there's no variety and diversity in life. Life becomes very boring. The power of focus is another essential posture that, or skill rather, that is gained and benefit from embracing fear. So fear is an acute state and feeling. It teaches us to be focused. With this focus, we're able to concentrate on creative solutions, if we choose to, of course, to alleviate the often pain that's associated with fear. So this cultivated focus allows us to extend ourselves and understand ourselves with greater depth and clarity, well beyond what we normally would do if we ignore the fear and didn't allow ourselves to focus on that pain and experience it directly and really embrace what is actually happening and going on. And it's really assuming the vantage point and perspective of the reality and duality and the polarity of life. And that's what it is. Presence. Fear gives us and provides us with presence. We learn to become very present when we are confronted with fear. We have to. We don't really have a choice around the matter. We have to get present because it's so fucking intense. Additionally, we're able to develop an opportunity to assume an empowered posture to counteract the constriction associated with fear. Flexing this muscle in and of itself allows us to connect to self a lot deeper and know ourselves, our pain points, our struggles, our perceived limitations with such greater efficacy in knowing and knowledge and wisdom. And with that, we become, well, more present in life because that correlates. Think of a CV. Think of you in a job and you're transitioning from one industry to the other. The skills you have developed in one industry correlate with another industry and many other industries. And when we express and exude these postures here in fear, that focus that we practice when we're experiencing fear translates and correlates to other areas of life, whether it be our relationships, whether it be our vocation, whether it be us teaching or learning something. Focus, presence, persistence. They correlate, they translate, they transfer to other areas of life, yeah? So let's round this off. Let's finalize and move through this particular webinar with looking at failure, looking at the benefits of failure, because there's so many. And I've picked, I think, 6 or 7 by memory. I'll go through them and we'll break them down. But by understanding the benefits of fear and failure, we soften the intensity, the perceived intensity of them. And that's very, very important in terms of taking initial first steps, baby steps, to allowing fear and failure, the concept of these, into our lives, yeah? Failure teaches us lessons, and it can be an efficient, if sometimes harsh, teacher in our careers, our vocation, our financial lives, in our frugal living goals. Learning what not to do is just as important as learning what to do. And the personal experiences that we have in life around perceived failure will shape who we become and how we become that person. So we want to be able to pay attention to that failure and view that failure as something that we can learn from and grow from. And that's very important, yeah? Failure also keeps us hungry and humble. Now, I don't mean physiologically hungry. I mean hungry for success. Success in this context being defined as wanting to be the best version of self and treading the path of that. The biggest enemy of long-term success is complacency. History is littered with stories of once great nations, cultures, organisations, companies that have banked on the notion that a successful past guarantees a successful future. It doesn't. Failure in life has a way of motivating us and inspiring us and giving us insight into who we are. It has a way of keeping us hungry and also yet humble at the same time, because it can be humiliating, it can be hurtful, it can be depressing and distressing, and that places us in a state of openness. And if we just ask to receive, what can I learn from this, we become more humble. People who know from experience that fortunes can be lost, that competitors never sleep, that downsizing in organisations happen, and that every market boom, for example, can go bust, tend to be more highly driven and more intentional and deliberate in their actions, because they realise that life is polarised, life is dual by nature, and failure is a natural part of life that we can learn and grow from and provide us feedback into who we are and who we wish to be and how we move through the world, yeah? Failure actually helps us overcome fear. So what is that we're most afraid of when we don't take full advantage of stepping into life, or when we put off doing something that's really important to us for present moment gain? Or when we say, or when we remain stuck in a job that we hate year after year, I'd say that we're most afraid of failing. We're most afraid of not accomplishing, not completing, not being, not living up to that perceived state or impression that others must hold us in. Once we face this is the curious thing about failure. Once we face this, it becomes a familiar posture, a familiar enemy, so to speak. And that familiarity can help us move on with the confidence that a stumble or fall won't be the end of our story, and it won't break us, and it won't be detrimental to our health and to our path and our journey and our goals and our dreams. Failure recommits us to our goals. It gives us it provides us with a perspective actually to recommit us to our goals or to shift our goalposts. Personal setbacks can be extremely clarifying. Extremely clarifying. You know, it's important, but instead of giving up, if we commit to a particular life that we want, and we have that laser-like focus, and we get clear by knowing ourselves deeply, profoundly, failure can help us reconnect to our goals and help us be strategic and creative in being better versions of ourselves. And that leads us to a fifth point of failure, which is failure inspires creative solutions. Now, it wasn't until a couple of years ago I was coasting through habitual patterning of behaviour and just doing what I'd always done without giving it a second thought. And I began to fail in life. My relationships, my vocation, my dreams, everything started to break down. And it started to break down because I was living incongruently and inauthentically and out of integrity for far too long. And that experience of failing in life forced me to look at my life, and it forced me to reevaluate everything that I was. And I had a choice. I didn't have to look at that. I could have just ignored it and blamed others and passed the proverbial buck, so to speak. I could have found a scapegoat in my external world and not looked within, but I chose to look within, and that failure of life allowed me to really understand life from a different perspective. And I began to know what I truly wanted and what I didn't want in life, and who I wanted to be and who I didn't want to be. And with that failure, I was able to discover and create a new redefined version of self that I'm far more proud of and connected to. And it's because of that perceived failure of life. And I really did fail in vocation, in my dreams, in my relationships, and not so much my health. My health probably my health remained okay, actually, funnily enough. But every other area of my life financially just broke. It was because of failure that I was allowed to then flourish into abundance through a series of choices and hard work, persistence, focus, but choices. Failure strengthens our support system. You know, the old poetic line, laugh and the world laughs with you, weep and you weep alone, may not be entirely accurate. In fact, when we fail, we send out flares. We send out signal flares and a call for help, often without even realising it. It's in our body language. It's though if we have a close group of peers, they will recognise that. They will see that. And most people that are intuitive enough will pick up on that as well. Especially to those who matter most, friends, family, close colleagues. They can offer assistance or simply just lend an empathetic ear and compassionate soul. This process strengthens our support system and builds a network of resources to help us succeed next time, but also help us understand our failings and provide us with perspective. I always say that a trusted, revered, respected source of information is always going to be heard far more openly than someone that we don't trust. So look to those that you trust to help guide and support you through your journey, yeah? And failure makes us more vulnerable mentors. And when we're vulnerable and we're open, we allow others to be the same for us. The most qualified teachers in the world are those who have been through it all and know how to weather it all. A large part of effective mentorship is helping anticipate and avoid pitfalls, staying focused, respond to challenges with creativity and optimism, and also a soulful appreciation and deep gratitude for life. Now, why do I mention mentors? not everyone's a mentor? Well, no, actually we are. We're biologically hardwired to be of service. And I spoke to this in the first tenet of sovereign leadership and being of service. We receive positive feedback loops internally when we are of service. It's a survival self-preservation mechanism. When we are able to get the most out of those around us, it enhances our chances for survival culturally, biologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, in every single way. So failure, experiencing the ups and the downs of life, help us be far more efficient human beings. Now, I want to leave you with a self-help exercise. I want to leave you with a self-work exercise. I want you to make a list of all your fears, everything. Get deep. Observe superficial fears, deeper fears, observe your beliefs and behaviours around your life. If you're having trouble understanding your fears, think about and feel into whatever situation, circumstance, or relationship give you most angst, apprehension, or even disconnect in life. Then once you've identified these fears, ask yourself why. This will effectively lead you closer to identifying your deepest fears. The quality of the questions we ask ourselves in life, of course, determine the quality of the life that we live and the outcomes of the lives that we live. So once you've made this list, allow the reality of these fears to settle. Know that this is all part of your shadow self, of course, and you're learning and growing through this. And it's normal to feel even angry or to feel upset at yourself or quite shocked or to feel an array of differing fears. This is normal. So acknowledgement, awareness, taking ownership of these fears is the first step to ultimate liberation of self from unconstructive feeling attachments. Now, once you've done this, pick the very minor fears. Pick the fears that would challenge you, give you a little bit of apprehension and some butterflies in the tummy. And then you know what? Go out there and live that fear every day. Maybe it's approaching someone that you quite like and you'd like to ask them out for a meal, or maybe it's about volunteering your services somewhere. Maybe it's about speaking openly on a forum, a platform, something that you feel strongly about. Maybe it's about applying for a job that you think you won't get, whatever it may be. Do something nearly every day that scares you. Maybe it's having a confronting conversation, not an aggressive conversation, but a confronting conversation, but doing it in a passive way. Whatever scares you, embrace it. Build that muscle. Learn to cultivate courage, but start really small. I want to thank you for being on this webinar. Thank you so much for listening, for watching, for being present. If you have any questions during the week, please feel free to private message me. And of course, if you believe in this message, share it. But of course, more importantly, if you have a truth you wish to speak, share that with the world. The world needs the most authentic version of you. And you have no right to deny the world of that power and beauty. I thank you once again. Thank you so much for your time. Many blessings on your journey. Take care.